While World War II is often dated to September 1939, the strategic point of no return arrived a full year earlier. By 1938, the internal mechanics of a global conflict were already in motion. Early that year, a distinct atmosphere of dread settled over Europe. Civilians in major cities expected bombing raids to start at any moment. Governments were so certain that poison gas would be dropped from the sky that they began issuing masks to millions of citizens. This line of massive battleships reflects the global scale of the threat. In May, the United States Congress passed the Second Vinson Act, funding a 20% increase in the strength of the Navy to prepare for the rising aggression across two continents. World powers recognized the momentum toward conflict, but were paralyzed by a deep cognitive dissonance. Leaders were caught between preparing for total war and the desperate hope that diplomacy could still function. This split the world into two realities. Western leaders remained convinced they could negotiate their way out of bloodshed, even as a total war for survival was already tearing the East apart. Look at these men of the German High Command. Early in 1938, Adolf Hitler purged the cautious military voices who warned that Germany was not ready for a general war. He forced out War Minister von Blomberg and Army head von Fritsch over manufactured scandals, installed hawkish loyalists, and took direct command of the armed forces himself. This consolidation of power led directly to the streets of Vienna. In March, Hitler ordered his military to the Austrian border, forcing the chancellor to resign. German troops rolled in, and the subsequent annexation, a union known as the Anschluss, was ratified by a thoroughly rigged referendum. Thousands turned out to welcome the invaders with Nazi salutes. This annexation triggered immediate street-level violence. Away from the celebrations, Austrian Nazis, aided by the German invaders, began rounding up political opponents and beating Viennese Jews in public view. Hitler next targeted the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. Though the Czechs possessed strong defenses and a treaty with France, the British and French governments sidelined their allies to pursue a diplomatic settlement directly with Berlin. This photograph from the Munich conference that September shows the result. Britain, France, and Italy surrendered Czech territory to Hitler and Mussolini. The Western diplomats operated on the belief that this concession would satisfy Hitler's territorial demands. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned home to a hero's welcome. He believed he had secured a lasting peace, but his policy of appeasement relied on a flawed assessment of Hitler's character and intentions. In truth, Hitler was infuriated. He had intended to use the Czech crisis to blood his newly rebuilt military in a short war. The diplomatic settlement deprived him of the military conquest he had planned. Any remaining hope for a stable peace shattered in November during Kristallnacht. Looking at this destroyed Jewish storefront, the violent reality of the Nazi regime is clear. Over 2 nights, hundreds of Jews were murdered, and 30,000 men were sent to concentration camps, proving the regime's internal aggression could not be contained by treaties. While Europe focused on a fragile diplomatic settlement, diplomacy was already dead halfway across the world. The Asian continent was fully engulfed in the industrial slaughter of total war. That spring, the Japanese parliament passed the State General Mobilization Law. This gave the government absolute control over the economy, heavy industry, and the media to meet the insatiable needs of their military machine. This column of Japanese troops illustrates the scale of the conflict. At Suzhou and Wuhan, million-man armies clashed in the field, utilizing modern weaponry, aircraft, and poison gas. Facing this offensive was Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek. His forces were massively outnumbered, suffering from heavy losses and facing total encirclement by the rapidly advancing Japanese. To slow the Japanese advance, Chiang made a decision of extreme ruthlessness. He ordered his troops to destroy the dikes of the Yellow River Basin. To ensure the floodwaters caught the Japanese off guard, the local civilian population received no warning. The human cost is visible here. The resulting flood drowned or starved an estimated 900,000 Chinese peasants and created 4 million refugees. It remains the most destructive man-made disaster in history. As you can see from this urban combat, the flood only brought a temporary reprieve. The Japanese military reorganized and pushed forward, capturing Wuhan and Canton that fall, and severing 80% of the foreign supply routes to the Chinese nationalists. Japan now controlled 87% of China's productive capacity. However, these conquests drained their resources and left the imperial army stuck in a massive military stalemate against nationalist and communist guerrillas. The sheer human toll in China demonstrated that the era of international diplomacy had ended. The world was now dealing with an empire committed to absolute warfare. By the end of 1938, the geopolitical trap had closed. The events in both hemispheres had made a general war unavoidable. Hitler took the Munich Agreement as proof of Western weakness, leaving him convinced that military force would go unchallenged in his next invasion. Simultaneously, Japan's stalemate in China forced the empire to look outward. Desperate for the raw materials needed to sustain their military, they began probing entirely new borders. These Japanese soldiers operating an artillery piece highlight that expansion. That summer, border tensions with the Soviet Union erupted into fighting at Lake Khasan, leaving hundreds dead and drawing another superpower toward the conflict. These crises were now converging. Hitler's emboldened expansion in the West and Japan's desperate requirement to feed its war machine in the East created a momentum that no treaty could break. 1938 was the year the illusion of containment died. The coming conflict could no longer be averted through negotiation. It would have to be resolved